Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join this informational meeting about the West Reserve Drive Corridor Planning Study. We're very appreciative of your willingness to participate in this virtual platform. We'd certainly much rather see all of your smiling faces in person, but we recognize that the public is very engaged in this corridor and your input is very important to us. Considering that, we'll use Zoom for now and keep our fingers crossed that we'll be back to meeting in person very soon. To that end, I'll go over a couple quick housekeeping items as we get started. We will be fielding questions using the Q&A function. That's the button that looks like the speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. Questions that are applicable to the general public will be addressed live at the end of this meeting. To be respectful of everyone's time, if your inquiry is specific to your property, a project team member will follow up with you directly in the next few days. Please also feel free to add any other comments that you wish be heard by the project team using the same Q&A button. To have an accurate record of all of your feedback, we do need to field all of the questions and comments through the Q&A function and won't be using the raise hand tool for today's meeting. Following the meeting, you'll also be welcome to offer thoughts and ask questions using the contact information provided at the end of the presentation. And finally, it is important to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be added to the study website for future reference for anyone who wasn't able to attend today. So please feel free to share that information with anyone that you think is interested. All of MDT's efforts, including corridor planning studies like this one, contribute towards the goal of Vision Zero, which is working towards zero fatalities and zero serious injuries on Montana roads. And this meeting, it is important to note, is being held pursuant to Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which ensures that no person shall be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination on the basis of protected status under any MDT program or activity. And with that, I will pass the baton to Bob to provide a welcome and introduction.
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Vosen. I'm the district administrator for the Missoula district with the Department of Transportation. Thanks, as Lisa said, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Those of you that know me know that I would much rather prefer to be doing this in person than via the virtual method, but I think that we can have an effective presentation today. I hope we're able to answer some questions for everyone and kind of give everyone a clear understanding of where we're going with this very needed project in the Kalispell area. To start out with, again, thank everybody for joining us, but real quick, I'd like to allow everybody that's part of the team to introduce themselves. So we'll start out with Vicki Cernich.
Hi, I'm Vicki Cernich, and I am the Missoula District Planner, and I work in statewide and urban planning in Helena.
Thanks, Vicki. Cody?
Hi, this is Cody Salo, and I am working with Vicki. I'm actually employed by Dowell, and we are a consultant helping MDT with this planning study, and I'm the project manager.
And everybody, thanks, Cody. Lisa?
Hi, everyone. Lisa Olmstead, also with Dowell as public involvement.
Thanks, Lisa. And thank you for leading us through this today. Sarah?
Yeah, I'm Sarah Patterson. I'm a traffic engineer at Dowell.
Thank you, Sarah. And finally, Emily.
Hi, Emily Peterson with Dowell. I am the environmental manager looking at the environmental components of this study.
All right, thank you, everyone. So that's the team that with Dowell that's working with MDT to help us put together this corridor study. I'm excited to be working with them. And like I said, very excited for this project to be moving forward. I think everybody knows that Kalispell is experiencing a very high growth right now, particularly at the north end, the area around this study area and further north. And I also think that everybody is aware of the traffic congestion that we see, particularly at this intersection on your screen right now. So the reason that we're embarking on this study is the corridor study is a comprehensive, it's a comprehensive long-range plan that's going to allow us to focus on the management of the corridor and help us to determine what the long-term needs are, to make sure that as we go forward with a design that we're not missing critical components in the future, that we're going to solve not only the needs of today, but put ourselves in the best position to make sure that the solutions we come up with today will help serve the area going into the future. It's going to help us identify what improvements can be made and need to be made, and what the needs of the public and the agencies are, and what the financial feasibility of some of these of this work is. And then the last component of it is that we have to be aware of the different constraints that are going to be placed on the project. We've got a couple rivers and wetlands in the area, so there's environmental constraints that we have to be cognizant of. So this process is going to allow us to, hopefully, once we get through this process, we'll be able to move a project ahead in as quick a fashion as possible. Obviously, one of our challenges, and everybody's heard it over and over, is the financial feasibility, but there's all of these other concerns. So we need to make sure that we're checking all the boxes, and we're developing a project that truly meets the needs and intent of the project and of the area. And we want to do it in a manner that allows us to move forward with the project as quick as possible. So with that brief kind of rundown, I'm going to turn it over to Vicki at this point. So Vicki.
Thanks, Bob. I am going to tell you a little bit about corridor studies. First, a little background. So in 2007, MDT developed an official process for linking planning studies with environmental reviews. The process was developed in close coordination with FHWA and the resource agencies. So that way everyone involved was aware of and comfortable with the outcomes of the process and the use of those outcomes directly in the project development process. Over the years, MDT has saved millions in time and money on this. So building on what Bob just presented, a corridor study is a high-level examination of the study area. We look at the social and the economic and the environmental effects early in the process. The study also involves looking at existing and projected conditions in the area, including review of the safety, some operations, the geometric conditions, and certainly in the environmental resources, all of that in order to identify any constraints or fatal flaws. All of this information, along with input from the public and the resource agencies, helps clearly define the needs and objectives of the study areas. The corridor study also provides a link between early transportation planning and environmental compliance efforts for support and development, helping to make any future projects that come out of this more shovel-ready. Lots of times people are curious as to why we do studies as opposed to just moving into a project. Well, there are a lot of really great benefits from the outcomes of corridor studies. Some of those include providing a suite of improvements. The corridor studies provide a basis for elimination of alternatives, and it's really easy to screen out alternatives and/or fatal flaws based on financial or environmental constraints during the planning process. The corridor study is a way to identify early the potential transportation improvements that could be used, the costs associated with those improvements, and the funding viability. Corridor studies also enhance the ability to identify fundable segments that serve independent utility for implementation. Also, early consultation and documentation of public involvement, both with the public right now, like this meeting, and resource agencies, and all of that documentation can be used to inform project development. Also, since MDT has implemented this process, we've been successful in not needing to complete higher level environmental review processes, such as environmental assessments and environmental impact statements, thereby saving a lot of time and money during project development. I'm gonna shoot it over to Cody now, and he is going to run through the agenda for you.
All right, thanks, Vicki. So I'm going to go over what we're going to cover today. First things first, we're going to go over the goals and purpose of the study. And then we're going to give you an overview of the existing physical features and some of the traffic conditions that we've analyzed. We'll get into some of the environmental characteristics, and I'll have Emily step in and help with that. And then we're going to get into the next steps in the study process and kind of get everyone up to speed with the schedule and where we're going. And then we'll open up for questions at the end. I have Lisa ready to show some interesting ways that you can comment and submit some information to us. So let's talk about the goals and purpose of the study. So like Vicki had mentioned, we're going to start with a high-level scan of the study area. And then from that information, we're going to get into developing needs and objectives, which are essentially statements about what we know the corridor issues are and how to kind of frame what we're going to look at as far as improvement options moving forward. And improvement options could be anything from small improvements in the near term to large improvements in the long term. So with that information, we'll then estimate costs, we'll assess potential environmental impacts, for example, and just look over the overall feasibility of each of those alternatives. And then we compile all that information and data for use in the environmental process if a project moves forward out of this study. So let's review the study area and background information from the research we've completed to date. So our study limits extend from US 93 at the intersection there, all the way to US 2 to that intersection. And it includes also a segment of Whitefish Stage Road for about a half mile north of West Reserve, and also extending about 300 or so feet south of West Reserve on Whitefish Stage Road. We always look at these study areas as kind of a buffer. And so in this case, our study area includes a 250-foot buffer on each side for a total of 500 feet on each of those roadways. So a corridor study serves a wide range of uses. We're actually looking at West Reserve from the standpoint of, commercial, agricultural, there's some industrial and residential uses that it currently serves. We understand there's rapid growth in the Flathead Valley, and that's obviously contributing a lot of traffic and congestion to these corridors. These traffic issues, we'll get into a little more detail here later. Sarah is going to share some information with you. And again, we're only looking at basically US 93 to US 2 on West Reserve, and then a half mile segment on Whitefish Stage Road. So let's talk about the study schedule for a few minutes, because I think this will help to demonstrate exactly how the process works. So we're at the point where we've developed a draft environmental scan. We've looked at environmental factors, and then we've also looked at the existing and projected conditions, and that's kind of along the lines of traffic conditions now and what we would expect them to be in the future. And we're looking at 2040 as our general time frame for a future condition, so about 20 years out. And what we do is we share all that information with the public, you, agencies, stakeholders, and so forth. And we want to make sure that we're not missing any information. So that brings us to today, this first informational meeting. And we're here to gather feedback from you. And so we'll again get into that with Lisa later. But we're here today to share information and then gather your input. We take that input, and what we do with that is then take a look at the needs and objectives of the corridor. And so things will rise up to our attention that obviously need to be addressed. And so we create these statements that essentially help guide us into developing improvement options. So they essentially are criteria that we need to meet to develop an option to address them. And once we have a whole suite of improvement options developed, then we'll come back and meet with you again at a second meeting. And we're intending that to be sometime in mid to late summer. And we would gather input from you again on all that new information that we've developed. And then we would take that to the agencies and stakeholders and then compile that all into a final corridor study report. And the time frame for that would likely be this fall. We're shooting for October of this year to wrap this up. So let's get into the existing and projected conditions. So from a roadway standpoint, West Reserve Drive, beginning at US 93, is essentially a 5-lane roadway. Now it does divide up into several turn lanes and so forth, but it's essentially 5 lanes. And that continues on to Hutton Ranch Road, where then it necks down to a 3-lane roadway with a travel lane in each direction and then a turn lane down the center. And that pretty well continues all the way to US 2 at the intersection there. And Whitefish Stage Road is really what we consider a 2-lane roadway. It's kind of a rural setting, it just has ditches. Whereas West Reserve is obviously more urbanized. It has curb and gutter and sidewalk. So the pavement condition from our assessment is basically from Whitefish Stage Road to the west, we consider that to be fair condition. But east of Whitefish Stage Road, we consider that to be poor condition. And obviously you probably have seen that driving on the facility. And from a maintenance standpoint, I think it's good to understand the jurisdiction here. So MDT is responsible for the maintenance of West Reserve Drive, and they're also responsible for Whitefish Stage Road to the north of West Reserve. But south of West Reserve, Whitefish Stage Road is actually locally maintained. So that's kind of a separation point between locals and then the state. There are 2 bridges on the corridor. One's over the Stillwater River and the other's over the Whitefish River. Both of these bridges were built in 1983, and they've both received some work over the years. They've been rehabilitated. They have newer guardrail, newer barrier and things like that. Both of the structures exhibit quite a bit of deck maintenance. You've probably noticed that there's a lot of kind of potholy looking things on the decks. And so they have gotten to a point where they're requiring quite a bit of work. But structurally, both of those bridges are in really good condition. So that's just of note that they're in decent shape that way. When we examine the sidewalk and driveways, one of the things we notice is that there is quite a bit of sidewalk along the corridor, but it's somewhat inconsistent. And what I'm talking about is there's sidewalk on both the north and south sides of West Reserve on the far west end of the corridor. But then as we get towards the Stillwater Bridge, we lose some sidewalk on the north. It does continue on the south all the way to the Whitefish River Bridge and just slightly beyond, but then it actually transitions over to the north again. And so there's kind of a lack of connectivity. There's no official crosswalk or anything where it does jump across West Reserve. The speed limit also decreases at the Whitefish River Bridge. It goes to 40 miles per hour. So that's also kind of a differentiator along the corridor. And that also corresponds with a high number of residential and commercial driveway approaches. And you've probably noticed that, but there's a lot of driveways leading up to the US 2 intersection. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for a few minutes to get into the traffic and some of the analysis that we've done.
All right, so this slide shows our existing average daily traffic volumes on the roads in the study area. And that's measured in vehicles per day. And so as you can see on the west end of Reserve, we have about 18 to 20,000 vehicles per day, whereas the east end has a little bit lower traffic with 13 to 15,000 vehicles per day. And as a point of reference, the planning level capacity of a 3-lane roadway, a road with 1 lane in each direction and a center turn lane, is about 18,300. So we're sitting right at capacity at that segment west of Whitefish Stage Road. And that's also evident from observing that PM peak hour, where we see a lot of congestion and delay on that segment, particularly in the eastbound direction, heading toward Whitefish Stage Road. So we looked at a variety of sources. We looked at historic traffic counts on the corridor, and we looked at other planning level studies in order to estimate our 2040 traffic volumes. And based on this range of sources, we're estimating about 2.4% growth per year between now and 2040. And extrapolated out to 2040, these are the volumes that we're expecting to see. So we're looking at 30 to 32,000 vehicles per day on the west end, and on the east end of Reserve, about 22 to 25,000 vehicles per day. So we also looked at intersection level of service at 7 study intersections along the corridor. And level of service is just a measurement of the quality of traffic flow at an intersection. It ranges between A and F, with level of service E and F representing failing conditions. And I'll mention here that we did our traffic counts for this analysis in October 2020, and recognizing that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted some travel patterns with people working from home, we compared that October 2020 traffic count to historic data collected in the last 2 years. And from that comparison, we were able to see that the AM peak hour is about 10% lower right now due to COVID traffic impacts. And the PM peak hour, however, was only about 3% lower. So not much of a difference in the PM peak hour traffic volumes. So based on that information, we used the historic traffic counts because we felt they were the best representation of corridor conditions, corridor traffic at the 3 major intersections where we had that historic data. And those were at 93 Whitefish Stage Road and US 2. And then at the other intersections where we did not have historic data, we factored those traffic counts up to account for those COVID traffic impacts. So just as an overview of where we're looking at level of service in the existing condition, we do have 2 intersections failing. The first is Whitefish Stage Road. And like I mentioned before, that intersection has quite a bit of existing congestion and delay. That's operating at level of service E. Countryway is a stop controlled intersection, and at a stop controlled intersection, our delay is measured on the side street. So that's vehicles sitting at the stop sign on Countryway looking for a gap in traffic. So we do see a high delay in that PM peak hour in the existing condition. And our 2 major intersections, US 93 and US 2, on either end of the corridor, those are both operating at level of service D, which means we're approaching unstable flow there. And then the other intersection worth pointing out is we did look at Home Depot, and that intersection also has level of service D in the PM peak hour. When we project our traffic volumes out to 2040, we're expecting all intersections to fail if we have our existing intersection lineage. So this slide now looks at the traffic crash data along the corridor. It's the density of traffic crashes, and it also shows your location of serious injury crashes. And so for this analysis, we looked at 10 years of data from 2010 to 2020, and that data showed that we've seen our number of crashes per year double over the last 10 years. So that went from about 50 crashes per year in 2010 to about 100 crashes per year currently. And increasing crashes is attributed to a couple of things. We have development, which has occurred on the last 10 years. The Hutton Ranch Road intersection was completed in 2012. Kalispell Bypass was completed in 2017. And those 2 intersections have increased the amount of turning movements on the corridor, which has naturally increased the number of crashes. Another contributing factor to the increase has been traffic congestion. So we've seen our traffic congestion increase over the last 10 years, which also contributes to crashes. When we looked at crashes by time of day, we saw that about 38% of crashes occurred between 3 and 6 p.m., which is when we have our congested traffic conditions. And we also saw that majority of the traffic crashes were rear end collisions, which is a really common crash type for a signalized intersection, which is experiencing congestion and delay. And then the other last thing I wanted to point out on this is we do see quite a bit of higher crash rates at Whitefish Stage Road intersection. And our crash rate is basically the number of crashes per vehicles at that intersection. And we saw that Whitefish Stage Road really stood out as having a very high crash rate compared to other intersections on the corridor. And that's, again, attributed to the higher congestion that we see at that intersection. And that's all I had to share with the traffic analysis. And I'll hand it back over to Cody to provide some other summaries.
Yeah, thanks. So from our review of the study area, we identified some key takeaways to consider as the study moves forward. So from a physical feature standpoint, We noted that there's closely spaced driveways with a lower speed limit on that east end of the West Reserve corridor. There's definitely some gaps and lack of connectivity from a sidewalk standpoint. The pavement condition is not great on the west, and it's really poor on the east. From a traffic standpoint, we see that West Reserve is near capacity, as Sarah illustrated. And we have a couple of intersections that are technically already failed at this point, and we fully expect that all 7 of them would fail by 2040. From a safety standpoint, we noted that the crashes have actually doubled in the 10 years that we've been looking at the data from 2010 to 2020, and that's a critical statistic. We also noted that Whitefish Stage Road intersection has the highest crash rate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily to go over the environmental information.
Thanks, Cody. So as part of this study, we conducted a planning level overview of the existing physical, biological, social, and cultural resources that exist within the corridor to get a sense of what the environmental constraints and opportunities might be. Some of the resources that we looked at were socioeconomic conditions, land use and farmland, wildlife occurrences and threatened and endangered species, wetlands and floodplains, hazardous materials, and cultural resources. So I'm just going to briefly discuss some of the primary conditions that we identified. So we did pull census data for this area, and as Cody and Bob have already noted, certainly this area is seeing quite a bit of growth, and this growth is expected to continue over the next 20 years. We also noticed that in this area, there is a high concentration of low-income and middle-income households, but there's also a very high concentration of very high-income households, which is indicative of a recreation resource type community. We also looked at populations in the area that would be covered under environmental justice requirements and executive orders. And these are essentially low-income and minority populations. And within this area, we did not identify any of these concentrated populations that could potentially be impacted by any projects that we move forward from this study. Land use was certainly a big one within this corridor. As you can see from this figure, a lot of the land in this area has designated zoning to it. A lot of the undeveloped and agricultural land is certainly zoned for future residential and commercial use. And the Kalispell North Center, which is a planned urban development, is also planned for this area. So certainly in the future with this land use, these land use changes, quite a bit more traffic coming to this area. You'll also see along the Whitefish River, there's the future annexation boundary for the city of Kalispell. So quite a bit of this corridor in the future will be within the Kalispell city limits. On the aquatic resource, and I guess the biological side of things, as Bob had mentioned earlier, there are 2 rivers that cross this corridor, the Stillwater River and the Whitefish River. Both of these rivers are designated impaired rivers, and they're impaired because they do not fully support aquatic life beneficial uses. So certainly something to think about as we're looking at improvement options. The Stillwater River does have a set maximum daily levels of pollutants that are allowed within that river. And the Whitefish River, those maximum levels are currently being evaluated. There's also, both rivers have 100-year floodplains that we'll have to consider when we're looking at improvement options. And there's quite a bit of wetland vegetation that exists along these rivers that we'll have to consider and try to avoid if possible when we're looking at improvement options. Both rivers have bull trout recorded within them. And so when we're looking at, certainly bull trout is an endangered species. So when we're looking at potential crossing structures or how improvements will impact water quality, certainly bull trout will be something that we'll have to consider. And then again, the annexation boundary for the city of Kalispell, when a lot of this corridor becomes part of the city, it will fall under the required stormwater regulations for their MS4 requirements. So certainly as part of this project, we'll have to consider how stormwater will be affected with improvement options. So with that, that gives you an idea of some of the conditions that we noted along this corridor, and I will turn it back over to Cody.
All right, let's talk about the next steps in the corridor planning process. So here is a list of the upcoming milestones. So right now we're gathering input from public agencies and stakeholders to complete the E&P, which is the existing and projected conditions report. And our goal is to have that wrapped up later this month. And that will then feed into our needs and objectives statements that we'll develop for the corridor. So we'll take all that information and we'll identify what issues need to be resolved, and we'll create statements that will help us with that. And then that leads into a collaborative process to generate potential improvement options. And so we're targeting early summer timeframe to develop those options and kind of feather through and eliminate some that may not be feasible. And then we would plan to meet again later in the summer, possibly in the July timeframe, to share all that information with you, the public, stakeholders, and agencies to get further input on all those improvement options. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa for a few minutes to talk about how you can get involved in the study process.
Thanks, Cody. So like we've mentioned before, the public involvement and the comments that you have to provide are incredibly important to this study process. So there are multiple ways for you to participate, to learn about the effort, and also to contribute thoughts, ideas, concerns, basically anything related to the corridor that you think the study team ought to know. So the first is there is a study website housed on the MDT website. That's the second link that's provided there on the website or on the page there. You can also reach out directly to the project team, and both Vicki and Cody's direct contact information is provided. We do also have a virtual platform where you can provide geographically associated comments. So I'm going to share my screen to just give you a little bit of a demo on how to work through that. And we will bring up the link for that again at the end of this presentation. But so this virtual platform we're hosting as a way for you to participate with a little bit more depth to your comments potentially. So there's information about the study itself. Again, the corridor map. Down here on the site, there are some frequently asked questions, so you can again delve into the information. And then there are two opportunities here for you to engage. There's join the discussion, which is a place where you can add comments and actually discuss things with your neighbors or your community members. And then also, this is probably where the real meat is on the map. And this is interactive, so you can actually scroll in, zoom around, look at, where your house is related to the corridor. And then what you can do is actually grab one of these pins from the top of the screen, and they are labeled idea, make a comment, something I like, safety concern. Grab whichever one you think is most applicable and actually drop it on the map. So for example, if you want to make a comment related to this interchange, you would just drop it right there and you can make a comment. So that helps to relay more detailed information to the study team. So I will go ahead and hand things back over to Cody, but we can go on into the Q&A at this point. And we do have one question in the queue. So we'll start there, and please feel free to go ahead and add any additional comments into the Q&A, and we will go through those. The first question is related to the corridor map, and wondering why the Whitefish Stage Road Rose Crossing was not included in the purview of the study, noting that Rose Crossing becomes another crossroad between Highway 93 North and Highway 2 East, and appears to be creating an east-west traffic flow as well as increased north-south traffic flow, more so along the need for 3 lanes north-south for the 1 mile between Reserve and Rose Crossing, with enough right-of-way for expansion, and 4 lanes long-term well the open space is available. Vicki, do you want to touch on that question?
Actually, I'm going to punt this question to Bob because I believe there might be a project already planned on that secondary road, but I don't want to misspeak.
Thanks, Vicki. You are correct, and that is exactly why this project is basically not going to leave a gap between a project we already have underway, which is from the very north end of where we end this project, as you saw in the study, all the way to the intersection of Whitefish Stage with Highway 40. So that's another project that's already in the works. So we didn't want to, we can't have 2 projects overlapping each other, but we also didn't want to leave a gap in between the 2 projects.
Okay. John, if you have any follow-up questions related to that answer, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Next question that's come in, and I think this one is probably for Vicki for starters, is what is the time frame for being shovel ready on this?
Well, the time frame for being shovel ready, assuming that there is an improvement that comes out of this, will be dependent on the financial viability. And Bob can jump in here on that in terms of when something would be financially viable.
So the finance part is obviously a key component, and also to be shovel ready. Typically, for a project to be shovel ready, that indicates that we have a design, and this is the study to kind of direct us where we're going to go with what that design needs to look like. There is the possibility of trying to come up with some alternative delivery methods, a CMGC or a design build project, but we're a little early yet to be able to come up with an actual shovel ready date at this point. The study will be completed as we discussed, later this year, and at that point we'll be able to see what it's hard to be able to say that what the financial needs of the project are until the study is complete, because we wouldn't be being true to the process if we started getting the cart in front of the horse, if you will. We need to see what we need to do so that we have an idea how much money I need to be able to come up with the program of projects. So we're moving just as fast as what we can with it, but we're a little early to come up with an answer to that question right now. Sorry, Randy.
Bob, I guess if you don't mind, I might jump in for just a second. So as we move forward, moving through the needs and objectives and then looking at improvement options, we will get pretty creative, and we will look at various ways that we could potentially have small improvements or segmented improvements that have independent utility. And what that means is, is there an alternative of some sort that could be completed that would serve the purpose and the goals of the corridor and move towards a final solution, but maybe might be more affordable financially. So we'll be collaborating with MDT and agencies and so forth, and we're going to be creative and put on our thinking caps to try to find ways to have a whole variety of options for MDT to take a look at moving forward.
Okay, and Randy actually posed an additional question. Will adding another connector between 4 Mile Drive and West Evergreen be part of this discussion?
I'll take that one, Lisa. And Randy, no, that can't be. That is not part of our route. The connection through that stretch is not part of the primary system, which is where the funding is coming from for this project.
Okay, and that's all the questions we have currently. Please, we'll hang on for a moment and see if any more questions come in. And while we wait for any additional questions, I'll again direct your attention to the ways to submit comments related to the corridor study, both the study website, that's the first domain name listed here on the screen. The second domain name is the independent participation platform. And then, of course, Vicki and Cody's contact information. And really, you are welcome to use whatever form is most comfortable for you, whether it's giving us a quick call, an email, or using the virtual platforms. We just really want to hear your input related to the study. It's very, very important and very helpful.
Lisa, I might just ask an open-ended question to the folks that are out there today. You know, considering the information that we presented, I always like to ask if there's anything that you think that we missed. And part of that too is maybe diving onto the study website and taking a look at the content that we've gathered so far and just see if there's anything else. But I just like to open up that question and see if there's any other insight or thoughts that the folks out there might have for us.
Yeah, and while we're here in the Zoom, if you have any comments, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A too. It doesn't have to be questions.
Mm-hmm.
So great turnout today. We really do sincerely appreciate everyone making time for this. And yeah, don't need to wrap up right away. We'll linger and make sure that we catch any follow-up questions. Again, we mentioned previously, but a recording of this presentation and the presentation from 5:30 this evening will be posted to the study website. So if you do visit with anyone that missed their opportunity, please encourage them to go online and watch the video if they are interested. Oh, one more question just came in. Rob asked, water and sewer utilities, is it better to contact project engineers? So this is from Rob at Evergreen Water and Sewer. We can.
Sure, I can jump in on that one, Lisa. So Rob, we did look at the water and sewer utilities and we have kind of a general understanding of what's out there. In particular, I think on the east end of West Reserve. That information is summarized in our existing and projected conditions report. But I could certainly follow up with you after this meeting and maybe we can get some more information from you with that respect. That'd be great. Rob, if you wouldn't mind, if you wanted to contact me with either my phone number or the email address that you see on the screen, we can connect on that and we can make sure that we've got everything addressed and accounted for.
Okay, well, it seems like people are starting to drop off. Again, we would encourage you to reach out in many or any of the ways to the study team. We definitely want to hear your inputs. And again, on behalf of the whole team, both MDT and Dowell, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to participate today. Vicki or Bob, do you have any closing thoughts, or we can wrap things up?
I guess my only closing thought would be thank you so much for, it's not a thought, it's a thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to join us to this morning. And please, whatever you think of, we would love to get your input. It's really important to help make this process successful. Thank you.
Yeah, Vicki, I would just say that add this as well. We will take comments throughout the entire process. So if anything comes to mind, please send it our direction.
And I just echo the thanks and again, the encouragement. The more info we have, the better we can advance the project. And just everybody remember, I'm a member of this community too. So I definitely have a strong understanding and need for of the need for this project and how the critical importance that it plays in our network here in the Flathead Valley. So thanks everyone and have a good afternoon.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting and thank you all for participating.